Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Koshin West. Welcome back to Integral Transformative Bodyworks Sunday School. ITB Sunday School happens every Sunday at noon Eastern Time. We go for about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on what the lecture is about. This week, we are focusing on something called shamanic journeying and soul retrieval or spirit retrieval. We're going to, I'm going to give you some insights about what those things are from a global type of a perspective, not just a singular. And we'll talk about some of those details and we'll get into that. Once again, as usual, these videos are free to everybody. Feel free to share them with whoever you want. We do welcome donations here at ITB, and you can find our donation links on our website, embodyingitb.org. You can also find them in when this video is posted, we should have a link for that in the description portion of the video. We are simply, of course, we're not expecting a donation, but we love a donation. Suggested donation is about $10, $15, somewhere around there. So we appreciate it if you are able to perform that. If not, doesn't matter. Show up anyway. Enjoy the information as we go. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hop on in. And we're going to start talking about what shamanic journeying is. So shamanic journeying is, it would be really helpful if you caught our last video on altered states of consciousness. We shorten altered states of consciousness up to ASC. So an ASC is anytime we move from this kind of conversational interaction kind of brain state into a shift of consciousness, a brainwave change, a different way of experiencing reality. There's a number of different ways ASCs can arise. We can do it through breathing. We can do it through adding a substance, caffeine, sugar, marijuana, ayahuasca, licking a frog, doing all kinds of different things. You can do it through different types of activities. You can do it through meditation. So there's a number of different ways that we have access to altered states of consciousness. Every human being on the face of the planet has access to altered states of consciousness. Every time we go to sleep and go through an actual full dream or full resting cycle, meaning when we go to deep REM sleep or deep sleep state, those are kind of an altered state of consciousness experience. We go from we're awake and laying down in bed or preparing to sleep, and then we shift brain states and we move into what could be generally called the dream realm experience, the subtle realm. And if we're able to hit deep sleep state, if we're not overstimulated, if we're not having different physiological changes, or if we're not on certain medications, we'll be able to move into a deeper state of sleep in which it's kind of just black. There's nothing there. More or less, there's oftentimes still a witness experiencing that deep sleep, but to get really good rejuvenating sleep, it's really important for humans to hit those deep sleep states. And so it kind of is, every time we go to sleep at night, we have that option. We will always move into a different brain state as we go into sleep. And depending on how good of a sleep we get, we'll kind of descend down through the dream realm and the different qualities of the dream realm, altered state of consciousness, and hit that deep dreamless, just really rejuvenating for the brain and body type of experience of dreaming. So we do this stuff on a regular basis. All ASCs are available to everyone, all human beings. It also appears that different creatures on the planet hit ASCs or experience altered states of consciousness and have that experience. So it can be really dramatic, like having a substance, or like going into a trance state. An altered state of consciousness also is when we move into a certain mood, or also if we move into a certain emotional state and it really is gripping us. That's also a type of altered state of consciousness. It's much more mellow. It's much more it's kind of a different pattern of brain, but we definitely do see that that is considered in several circles an altered state, but it's also different from if we're talking about moving into a trance state as well. So altered states of consciousness are natural for us human beings. They're very commonplace. They, as Wilber talks about in the integral theory model, States are free. Everybody has access to them. And we use them on a regular basis. So the altered states of consciousness is a pretty typical type of a conversation. The what's it called? Or I should say, it's a pretty typical type of a scenario for all of us. We've all had probably experiences of that. If you've ever had a dream, you were in an altered state, you were having that experience. So that's out of the way. Another thing to keep in mind is that from that altered state of consciousness conversation or lecture we did last week, there are 3 to 4 different realms that we want to identify. The first one is the gross realm. Gross realm has to do with not gross as in icky, I don't like it type term of use of gross, but gross having to mean like gross anatomy, gross experiences, or physical realm type things. So when it comes to states of consciousness or states of awareness, the gross state has to do very much with just sensory experiences, very bound to sensation. And there is a crossover of sensation into emotion. And that's kind of as we start to move into that other phase, from gross states of awareness to subtle states of awareness. Subtle states of awareness are what most of us identify as our normal mode of being. It's where we'll find ideas, perceptions, opinions, other emotional content, concepts, philosophies, beliefs, just a variety of very, very different types of complex emotional experiences. And of course, they are bound to a certain extent to the physical realm or the gross realm. And that's where most of us kind of live. Actually, our perception of self is very bound to the subtle realm. I mean, what we call my personality could be described, or my mind could be described very much as just a collection of thoughts and ideas and experiences that are very important to my system, and that I have considered the way I am. I will start to, the mind and the personality is an amalgamation. It's a gathering together of information and data and orientations that suit me and that are important to me for some reason. And all that kind of gravitational has a gravitational pull towards this center of awareness, this awareness that's inside of me. And I am, convinced, we human beings are literally convinced that what our mind says and what our emotions say, what our beliefs and philosophies are, we believe that they are 100% us. And we sometimes make that confusion, that emotions and the acts of the mind, philosophies and beliefs aren't who we are. They're just things that we use to have this human experience and navigate this human experience through this realm of reality. Our truer, deeper identity is based off of something that lives underneath or behind all of that activity of the mind and emotions and gross realm experience. And in our last lecture, that is defined as the causal or non-dual realm. The causal realm, the word causal is a translation, a way of translating what came out of the East as far as these states of consciousness being pointed out coming out of the East, how they were translated by the early Westerners seeing it. And so causal literally means that state in which all things are caused. Okay, so the causal realm, that causal state of awareness, is the place from which everything comes from. So it's the cause of all things bursting forth. So the causal realm or the causal state of awareness is not just a state that you can kind of go into, it's also our primal condition. It's the nature of who we are and our deepest self of self, or heart of hearts. And so we need to kind of keep in mind that that's kind of what's going on. When we talk about shamanic journeying, on the other hand, it's very much a investigation into the subtle realm of consciousness. So this is this practice of soul retrieval and shamanic journeying, and whatever phrase it has come up with throughout the centuries, or depending on whatever tradition you're talking about. This term of shamanic journeying, or this thing that is shamanic journeying and soul retrieval, it is a play, a investigation and exploration into the subtle realm that is shared by all creatures. So this kind of puts us into a position where we have to kind of start with, when talking about shamanic journeying, for this to kind of land in a semi-rational way, work out in a way that's going to fit as far as what we know scientifically about the human mind and about consciousness and whatnot. So this is going to rely upon an idea that we're going to have to agree upon to go forwards with this. All right. So the idea that we're going to have to agree upon is that we're all kind of swimming in consciousness. We're all kind of in this. Consciousness is simply freaking everywhere. And that means we kind of share it. Each individual, this body that I am, that's called Jeff at this point in time, is a certain arrangement of physiological factors based off of all things going on in my physiological self. And as this arrives into this ocean of consciousness, there is this awareness that comes through. And so this is oftentimes the suggestion that our own personal physical body and our personal experience of our lives, what we call our lives, is very terribly unique because it is a very, very specific arrangement of gross realm materials creating an option for the subtle realm and causal realm to express itself. So if we were talking about another human being, they are or if we're talking about my dog Sasha is a very specific manifestation from the gross realm perspective. She's a very specific physical manifestation. And so her experience of that physical manifestation is only going to be living within the realm that her physiology is available to express. So she is a vehicle of consciousness. I am a vehicle of consciousness. The difference being there are different biological structures expressing the consciousness that exists all around us. So that's not a bad idea to kind of work off of. Another way of saying this, one analogy that I've seen in several places is it's similar to a radio or a television. Back when we had, at least back in television, when we had antenna and radios with antenna and stuff like that, when that was a common and typical thing. If you have a radio and you turn that radio on and you tune into a certain station, you don't have to have the radio frequency inside the, the radio show inside of your actual radio. The radio show is flying through the air, and it's just that the apparatus expresses it, and it expresses it in its own certain way. Of course, the analogy falls short because that radio is that radio, and it's not in any way as complex as the human experience, or as a human body, or as for my dog, the canine body. But the analogy kind of lands for how we're going to have to proceed in the face of this. Other options that have come up as far as like explaining this kind of nicely and working out kind of nicely is the idea that there is an unconscious for us to dip into, that there is a consciousness for us to, in some form or fashion, we have to be willing to admit that there is a consciousness that we are all sharing, that we can relate to and touch into and connect with. That seems to be, through this investigation, both of myself and other people who investigate altered states of consciousness, and especially this topic of shamanic journeying and soul retrieval. It appears that we have to have some kind of philosophical orientation that suggests there is a consciousness that is shared by all of us, by a collective, that we can dip into or connect to. However you want to imagine that, I think is okay. The one I would suggest we subscribe to is this concept of the radio, and that we are all, based off of our physiological arrangement, we are then expressing consciousness, the consciousness that is freaking everywhere. We're expressing that consciousness in our own terribly unique way. So this is kind of a starting point we have to begin from. And this makes the conversation work a little bit better as we kind of figure out, well, all right, this is what shamanic journeying is, and then answer the question of, is this stuff actually worthy of investigating, and is there any quote unquote reality to it? So we kind of have to have a philosophical basis to kind of launch off of in order to kind of honor that reality. So this is the philosophical orientation we will suggest, which seems to be true. It seems to fit because we are seeing the tendency, science and research shows us that a lot of the human experience is a shared hallucination to a certain extent. It's a shared agreement about reality. And since our human bodies only are able to perceive reality within a certain context, that means that we are really, it's really easy for us to agree upon what's real and what's not real, but that doesn't mean we're actually perceiving the fullness of reality. Fundamentally, through this human body, I am not able to perceive the fullness of reality. It's just fundamentally impossible. I can't see certain phases of light. I can't experience certain phases of energy. So we have to kind of agree upon the idea that we're just doing our best as a species. We are doing our best to interpret what reality is, and we may be wickedly false in certain situations, and we're going to be agreeing upon a certain hallucination, a certain projection. We're going to agree that if you see the same things and I see the same things and then they see the same things, then hopefully we're going to see enough of reality. And so we kind of have to play along with that idea. We have to be willing to suspend our need to be right and correct and have proof in a way that proof, in a certain spectrum of proof, we have to be kind of loosey-goosey with that to a certain extent. We have to hold that gently, and we have to kind of trust people's experiences and trust the phenomena of what people report as we go through these altered states of consciousness. Some of these things that I'm saying so far might not make a whole lot of sense or bearing on why I'm bringing it up now in relationship to this shamanic journeying thing, but hopefully as we talk about what shamanic journeying is and these altered states of consciousness, it'll make a little bit more sense why I'm prefacing in this way. So here we go. Shamanic journeying. What is it? Shamanic journeying is entering an altered state of consciousness or trance state in order to achieve a goal. Now, throughout the world traditions, shamanic journeying has gone by different names, but it has existed as far as like anthropology can tell us, as far as the writings and the oral traditions can tell us historically. Shamanic journeying, moving into altered states of consciousness or into a trance state in order to achieve something, to retrieve something, to understand something, to gain something, or to give away something, that shit has been in our human culture from the very beginning, apparently. So, of course, it's taken different names, but it has been around forever, and it has been around the world forever. So this is a very common thing in the human experience. So it's not like a new thing. It's not segregated to one group or one tribe or one peoples or in one era of our human history. It's been around seemingly as long as human beings have been around. So shamanic journey is the most basic way of kind of talking about this. Is a human being moves into a trance state, an altered state, and then once there, performs some type of activity in order to achieve something or surrender something. Okay, so let's talk about this in a little bit more of a specific way, how most people have been taught to do shamanic journeying. So what occurs is on the shamanic journey, usually it's used, especially nowadays, the conversation is primarily for healing. Okay, healing or insight or something along those lines, something to do with healing or recovery or insight. So what occurs is through some type of medium, the participant moves into an altered state of consciousness, into a trance state. While they're in that trance state, their awareness, their mind dips into that subtle realm and then goes and does some activity. Usually the usual motif is to go into the underworld, and we'll talk about some of these different motifs a little bit later as we go, but they go into what's considered an underworld, or some type of spirit world, a heaven space or an ancestral space, and they will go into that territory, and they will go there for wisdom, for guidance, for experience, for maybe a psychological item in order to deliver some symbolic or ritual medicine for them. Okay, some insight. Maybe when they go into that underworld and experience that place, maybe they'll see what's it called? They'll meet certain creatures. They'll meet certain historical figures or entities. They will meet. They will make contact with something that'll give them insights. Maybe they'll see their own history. Maybe they'll see or feel or hear portions of their identity and different things along those lines. So it's hard to say what's going to happen once we go. But they do go. They do whatever they're going to do there. They're going to have whatever unfolding experience is going to unfold there. And then they're going to come back the way they came. They're going to go back up through whatever apparatus they were going to go travel through. They're going to go through some medium and back into normal waking consciousness from the subtle realm, unconscious experience, back up and into their normal waking state. How that all unfolds really depends on the tradition. Now, if we go back into our ancient peoples traditions, the indigenous people, all of our ancestors, the major way that they moved into a trance state or an altered state was usually through a drum or a rattle or some type of sound making instrument. And since the oldest instruments on this planet have been rattles and drums, that's the origin of most of those things. So, and it turns out, and who knows how the hell they found this out. It's a mystery. Obviously, there's no historical evidence of it. But one way or the other, the realization that a repetitive sound making device over several minutes can cause human brains to move into altered states. And so if you're beating a drum at a certain beat per minute, or if you're rattling your rattle at a certain rate, at a certain speed or tempo per minute, it has a tendency to cause the majority of human beings to start to move into a slightly altered state of consciousness. You can also use that repetitive beat or that repetitive tempo over several minutes to even go deeper into a trance state if you have some experience with it or if you have guidance with it. So probably the best answer for how did our ancestors figure this out, the best response I ever heard was drums were made, mushrooms were being eaten, and there you go. So it's not uncommon for ancient peoples to have been on mushrooms, hallucinogenic mushrooms, on a regular basis for hunting reasons and medicinal reasons and enjoyment reasons. And so the combination of that and music playing and merrymaking, most likely they noticed this combination that when you have the mushroom and when you have the music playing at the same time, you get even deeper results of this transcendent experience that goes on, this altered state. Of course, they translated in their own ways, but that's kind of what they found along the way. And through many what we could call shamanic traditions from around the world, the combination of use of some kind of substance and a drum is actually pretty common when they do shamanic journeying or soul retrieval or these different big altered state experiences. So that's probably where all this kind of came from. All right. And that's happened. We have evidence of this anthropologically. We have evidence of this around the world. There's no place where we have not found hallucinogenic mushrooms or hallucinogenic substances from animals or from other plants. So there's no shortage of evidence for that. And there's no shortage of evidence that we actually use these mushrooms, we humans use these mushrooms and these substances to move into altered states and all kinds of different reasons. And that's probably how all these things got coupled together and how those ancient practices kind of came together and what we call shamanic practices. So meanwhile, back at shamanic journeying, nowadays, since all that has been done historically, the suggestion is that since that was done for so very long in our human history, as the brain has evolved throughout history, there's still plenty of neural pathways, there's still plenty of neurology that allows for us to shift into different altered states of consciousness in different ways, but still that old tradition of a tempo for a certain period of time will occur and can be very helpful for moving us into those places. So it's moving into an altered state of consciousness. Altered state of consciousness, we then move into that subtle realm, and we're in that subtle realm where there's thoughts, there's ideas, there's dreams, there's imagination, there's concepts, there's all the play of consciousness having to do with mind, emotions, and higher thought forms. That's the first time I've ever sneezed on camera. Yeah, mazel tov. Okay, and excuse me. So it's similar around the world and throughout time. We have not seen one period of human progression and human evolution where altered states of consciousness have not been part of the scenery of that human history. Now, how it's been talked about or how it's been related to, it varies a good deal. But this type of journeying, this type of moving into an altered state of consciousness has been interpreted and has showed up through all portions of history. It hasn't really gone away, so to speak. It's just taken different forms. It has hidden for long periods of time, or it has been relegated to only secret societies or small groups of people. Sometimes they're very elitist in those forms. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just a group of religious zealot folks carrying that stuff and experiencing that stuff and using that. But it's been around forever. It's something that no matter who you are, where you come from, you know, what sophistication of the spiritual world you're in, it's a gift to you and it's an opportunity to do amazing things. So let's talk now about how the model of shamanic journeying usually goes. So when you, if you were to show up to an ITB gathering where we did shamanic journeying, we practiced some shamanic journeying stuff, or if you hired a ITB steward for some shamanic work or soul retrieval for you for an individual session, what would usually happen is we would either use music or have our own drum or rattle for this. We would sit down, we'd hang out, we'd spend some time together, we'd set some basic ground rules. And what usually occurs is the ground rules we set up is we will say, hey, listen, look around in your environment that's very familiar to you and look for some type of opening in the earth. Okay, now this can be as simple as a tree that has rotted that has an opening that you can kind of see going down into the ground. It can be a crack in the earth. It can be a hole that a snake has made or another animal has made into the ground. It doesn't have to be the size of your body. Remember, this is all done in the imagination realm, in the realm of the mind, in the subtle realm. So it doesn't have to be something you could actually like move into. This can be a cave you've seen on your property. This can be a hole or a crack in the earth, or something along those lines where there is a entryway of some form or fashion into the ground. Another way of kind of thinking about this is entryways can also be underwater. So if you have a river on your land or that you're terribly familiar with, or a lake or a spot like that, that you know very, very well and have a personal experience with, you can kind of use that and you can enter into that way, because we want you to have that mindset. We want you to be aware of this. We want you to have a close connection to it. And this is kind of like the portal. This is the way in which we're going to go in. And since this is in the subtle realm, we don't have to worry about these ridiculous inconveniences of, can I hold my breath? Am I going to be able to breathe in these places? You just kind of go into those areas. This is an active imagination type of a practice. And so when we think of this, we don't have to think of, oh, am I going to fit into it? Or, oh, does this, am I going to breathe? You know, I can't breathe underwater. Do I have to hold my breath for the whole shamanic journey or something like that? These type of details in the imagination realm, we don't have to worry about. And so we simply want you to pick one that you are very familiar with, maybe something that's important to you, and hold that in your mind and share that with us as practitioners. At that point in time, we will give you some instructions about as you enter that territory. Well, actually, it depends on how much instruction we're going to give you, but sometimes when we gather for groups, especially, we say stuff like, all right, once we enter into that area, you'll probably go through the ground for a while and then you'll open up into a territory. We also then give you some etiquette when you move into that underground territory. And that underground territory, the etiquette down there is that you don't just start grabbing stuff. You don't just start taking things. You walk through it as if you don't own it. You walk through it as if you are in someone else's home, and you can't just start grabbing stuff and taking things and tasting things and lounging wherever you want. We do suggest the etiquette of kind of treating everything there as the property of someone else who you greatly regard and respect. Okay, you are welcome to the area and you have been invited to that area, but we don't want you to walk around as if you own the place and that you can do whatever you want there. And some people ask, well, what's the big deal with the etiquette? The big deal with the etiquette is it's a way of creating a healthy boundary between this altered state and myself. My awareness that's going through this process creates some healthy boundaries as far as that's concerned. It also is an attempt to give some gravity to the fact that you are entering into a territory that it actually isn't yours. This is the collective unconscious. This is the great ocean of consciousness we're entering into. This isn't just you having a dream, if you're having a dream of your own and you're going into your own activation internally for your own self, that's your territory. But you're going into a place that's a shared territory. So we kind of want to enter into that territory with respect, with honor, with humility, just as if we, like I said, if we were entering into someone else's household that we are invited to, but we can't be expected to just grab and take whatever we want. Okay, so we do suggest that you proceed with an air of appreciation, of respect, of honoring other things and other people's boundaries, and also not living from a place of privilege that just because you're there means you have access to everything however you want. So we kind of are moving into a place, we hope to instill this idea of a certain amount of humility and honor and sacredness as we move into that territory. This just seems to create better integrity for the journey. This also seems to create a little bit more integrity as far as what you can gather there, what your insights are, and can create an opportunity for a little bit more sharing and intimacy to occur. The reality seems is that whatever happens in that world is also similar to our physical world, and the reality that or in a way that suggests that if you have proper boundaries, there's more intimacy to be shared because we trust each other, because we feel safer around each other. And when I don't honor your boundaries, that decreases your safety, your sense of safety with me, or your trust in me. So we want to support boundaries. We want to support consent. We want to uphold these things because it increases the sense of safety between us, and it increases the amount of intimacy we can give. So we do that in our external world. We suggest that everyone does that in their external world, in this waking world, but we also suggest you do that with your internal world and your experience of the collective unconscious, or the ocean of consciousness that surrounds us. It just seems to be a better way to proceed. So as we go into this realm, we spend some time there, and remember, the whole time the caretaker of the container, the lead for this shamanic journey, is playing a drum or rattling or has music going that is this repetitive motion. So the sound is going the whole time, and we are on this experience together. During the shamanic journey, you know, all kinds of things can come up. You can wander and proceed in all different directions. Remember, we do shamanic journeying for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's to understand what's going on in our world. Sometimes it's a healing. Sometimes it's to surrender something. Sometimes it's to connect with something. So it varies a good deal why we go into the shamanic journey. But when we go there, we try and go with the same etiquette. So once you're down in that space, once you're in that that altered state space, that underworld or that spirit world, once you go into that territory, we highly suggest you go looking for what you came for. Okay, and that's going to be that's kind of what you do while you're down there, and you just kind of figure that out on your own. The container caretaker, the medicine person that's leading the process, shouldn't give you a whole bunch of prompting about this. This is very much your own self-discovery experience and figuring out what's going to go on down there. But that means you have to actively participate in the process. That means you have to actively move into that world and engage that world. And for some people, especially Westerners, that can be kind of a tall order, because they are oftentimes, people are scared that this is a scam, or that this is some sort of just an imagination, so it carries no weight. So this is a misnomer, a misinterpretation of the thing. Of course, they are more than welcome to think whatever they want to think, but if they're coming in for whatever they're coming in for, we do suggest that they engage the experience and go through the process. So this is all happening. The drum's playing, or the rattle's being rattled, the drum's being played, the music is being played. We have that repetitive beat going. And then at some point in time, usually we create an agreed upon period of time, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever, what have you. And then once we hit that time period, the rattle or drum noise will change, and it'll go, instead of a very rapid bup 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 kind of a tempo, it'll move to bup bup Boop. So it'll go from a very rapid drum to a very slow drum or rattle. And that's the signal to come home. That's the signal when the persons that are journeying, when they hear that change of rhythm, that's their signal to return home and to participate in heading back to however they entered into that underworld realm or that spirit world realm, entering, going through that same portal, going through the earth or water, and then exiting the same place that they entered, as far as that's concerned. That being the crack in the earth, the hole in the earth, or the body of water that's moving that they're familiar with. Okay, so that's their entry and exit point into and out of that realm. And then usually what will occur is there will be some conversation and some education and support in unpacking what the journeyer kind of experienced and saw, and what they went through and what they gathered or what they surrendered during that period of time. Once again, a good container holder or medicine person administering the shamanic journey stuff, they're not going to tell you what these things mean. They shouldn't be telling you, let me rephrase that. They shouldn't be telling you what these things mean. They should be maybe giving you some data, giving you some information, giving you some reflections from different experiences. But it's not the medicine person's responsibility to tell you what you saw or tell you what you did. It's their responsibility to coach you and question you into kind of finding and exploring, what does this mean to you? How did it feel doing that? What did you notice about the area? It's kind of their job to add information, but then, or general knowledge, I should say, but then also to coach you in the process of discovering what actually went on during the process. One thing that really, one thing that really turns me off about a lot of these activities is when you have a medicine carrier or a person who's administering these gatherings or this type of work, and they, after they hear whatever went on, they launch into some monologue about what it meant to you and what you're supposed to take from it and what you should think. And that's way off base about how this ought to be done. So hopefully if you gather with someone that's outside of the ITB tradition, hopefully it won't be that kind of them telling you what to think, telling you what to take from it, telling you how to feel about it and experience it. The whole point of this practice is for you to have a personal experience of it, and then to discover that and to unpack it and to explore it and to kind of like get some different perspectives on it and kind of get the medicine via that process. Get the medicine from your own investigation, not from some other person's interpretation of it. There can be a sharing, but man, the medicine carrier, the container caretaker should not be telling you what that stuff is. They shouldn't be informing you of who you are. You should be fucking discovering that. So be cautious if that's the kind of stuff that comes out of their mouth. So that's usually the activity of a shamanic journey. Okay, that's the usual kind of storyline. Now there are other themes that we notice along the way. And these themes there's kind of 3 different types of themes we see around the world that are really, really typical. So we're going to talk a little bit about that to get in for a second here. So the world tree, or the axis mundi, or the center of the world. No matter what tradition we're looking at around the world, whatever era, oftentimes regular shamanic journeying, especially the training in this kind of trance stuff, will include getting to the center of things, getting to the center point of the world. And so in some traditions, if you are being trained to be a medicine carrier, and this is an activity that you're supposed to do as part of your medicine bundle as far as your medicine skills is concerned, you have your teacher teaching the student, and the student's responsibility will be in the beginning just to make a journey to the center. That's your beginning education, because that's, of great importance for this type of medicine carrying and this kind of healing work, is to be centered and have a sense of the center. So depending on what era, what tradition you're coming from, there can be a lot of different words for this. I really like the tree, the world tree. The world tree it's phenomenal, especially in our ancient history. Before we had a whole lot of written, during the era of the oral histories, before we had a whole lot of written stuff, boy, oh boy, the motif and or the oral history of shamanic journeying, the motif of the world tree is just, it's crazy. It's like ubiquitous. Almost every tradition has some type of story of this world tree that represents, that's just this ginormous tree that you go and visit in the spirit realm, in this shamanic realm, in this altered state, trance state. You go and visit, and boy, that tree is just freaking huge. The roots go all the way down to the center of earth, and the trunk goes up super, super high, and the branches reach up into the heavens and connect to the heavens. So it's like this super highway, so to speak, of activity. All right, it's the center of the universe as far as a lot of their traditions are concerned, and you can climb up it to go into the heavens, or you can follow the roots down to go into the underworld. But that's a very, very common motif. The world tree, one of the responsibilities that we do, and one of my responsibilities as a mentor in the ITB mentorship, is part of our beginning is making introductions to the world tree. We'll kind of make this journey. We'll all go into this shamanic trance experience, and their responsibility is to go to this world tree and just relate to the world tree, maybe offer up a gift, maybe just sit with it and make relationship to it and see what happens when they go and visit the world tree. The world tree is, for the shamanic journeyer, we suggest, at least, it's not across the board, but we suggest when we teach this stuff, your relationship to the world tree is of great importance, and you should spend time with the world tree. You should have a connection with the world tree, because it's the world tree that you travel. It's not you doing all the work. You're traveling through the tree, up the tree, down the tree, however. And the world tree is a metaphor for the center of your being, the center of all, not only your individual being, but the center for all human consciousness being. Even most likely extended through many traditions, that the world tree is also the center of being for all living creatures on the planet and or cosmos. So the world tree represents the center of all life on the planet and in experience. So at the world tree, everything comes together. All beings, all creatures, all creation comes together at the world tree. And then you can even travel up and down depending on your intentions. So this theme of the world tree is exceedingly common. Like I said, it's gone by different terms throughout time. Axis mundi is one, or center of the world. It's very, very, very common motif in a lot of traditions. Going to the center of the circle, going to the center of the labyrinth, going to center of the medicine wheel, going to the center of the mesa, however you want to phrase it, the centerpiece is where our center is, where all creation's center is. So this is an extremely common motif in the world. Next up is a term I also kind of used already, this underworld. The underworld is where most people, from what I've noticed and what a lot of traditions will talk about, that's one of the first things they will speak of, is the underworld. And for us here in the West, or anybody that's been raised in an Abrahamic tradition of religion, we want to keep in mind, meaning Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Baptist, Muslim type of a perspective, that the underworld is erroneously connected with hell. When we go to the underworld, this isn't a satanic practice, this isn't a black magic practice, this isn't a bad thing. When you go to the underworld is that metaphor for going into the unconscious. Now, no doubt about it, in the Christian Catholic tradition and other traditions that talk about a version of hell, the unconscious can be connected to that experience of hell, but the unconscious is not just hell. The unconscious is oftentimes the great spectrum of all things. This ocean of consciousness to go into, and no doubt about it, there can definitely be a shared projection of this thing most of us have known as hell. It lives there, but it's not only hell in the underworld. So when we talk about the underworld, a better way of kind of talking about it is talking about moving into the collective unconscious, moving into the collective underworld of the human experience, and create an opportunity for us to move through the territory of the subtle realm shared by all creation. We can move through the territory of consciousness and participate in that way and investigate and use it for how we need it. And then we can pop back on out and move back into our individuation, move back into our autonomy and our individuation as our own self. So the underworld, we don't want to confuse with anything bad. In fact, I mean, we all have Greek Roman kind of ties here in the West, and Elysium, their version of heaven, was in the underworld. You went to the underworld. If you went to heaven, Elysium was underground, technically. Of course, they had some different flavors in relationship to the afterworld, but heaven was, Elysium was underground. And so we don't want to confuse kind of, we don't want to project some of the mainstream perceptions of heaven and hell, or hell, onto this motif. It just doesn't seem to work very well. The underworld is usually a place where you will find those who have passed on. You will find those who are, who may have had, who have died, and either in a positive way or a negative way, you'll find them in the underworld. Usually it is the land of the dead that is underground. Now, that can be very scary for some people, but like I said, it's not the land of hell, it is the land of the dead. Some people pass very nicely, some people don't pass very nicely. And depending on the belief system or the motif of the culture and their relationship to the afterlife, they will then project onto this underworld experience kind of whatever stories they need to. Just like if we are in a mainstream kind of like Christian Catholic type of an orientation, that creation of hell, that group hallucination of hell, just naturally got projected onto the earth, into the ground, into dark, scary places when they were like, hey, we're not going there. But they don't really have a whole lot of bearing on reality when it comes to what you do when you go into the shamanic realm. And if you go into the underworld, if you follow the roots of the world tree down into the underworld, you find just a whole expanse of probabilities down there. Okay. So that's usually what we mean by underworld. Some people call this spirit world. Some traditions identify spirit world as a kind of like a separate entity type of a deal. Like spirit world is based off of like guides and different things along those lines. So depending on the story of whatever culture, whatever tradition you adhere to, these guys can kind of overlap each other, or they can be a little bit separate. They can be lumped into one group. For our conversation and what I do in ITB, we kind of lump all these guys together. So spirit world, the underworld, the land of the dead, these are all places where these are all places that are kind of just lumped together in different phases and things along those lines. And so that's kind of how we talk about them. Aside from the underworld, you can also go up the world tree into the branches, into the heavens. And this is where we oftentimes think of this as the upper world. These are the heavens. Every tradition has sky people, has people that are, and they can be ancestors. They can be the people that haven't been born yet. They can be other types of deities, other types of, special guides for transcendence and evolution and for healing. They can be, then they oftentimes are in the sky. And so oftentimes what we find if you just head to the upper world without a whole lot of guidance about what you're supposed to find there, what we find in the upper world is usually information about what we can become. It's usually information and experiences and a territory of becoming, of emerging, of evolution. Some people say when you go up the world tree, you're going into the higher states of human consciousness. This is usually what comes up out of this stuff. All right. We find places where it's the primary intention is kind of transcendent ideals, transcendent experiences. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't find those transcendent experiences in the underworld or in the spirit world. Once again, this really all depends on, traditions, lineage, and history and stuff like that. So we don't want to look at this whole story of the upper world, the world tree, and the underworld. We don't want to look at it in a very rigid way. It does not work at all to look at it in a rigid way. Remember, the origins of these things and the technology and the practices around this thing, it's all based off of human beings who are trying to figure out what reality was, trying to figure out when they dreamt or when they had this hallucinogen or when they played this music, the places they went internally. And they were trying to explain this stuff. They were trying to reveal the nature of the human experience. And so we kind of have to give them permission to not be 100% accurate, especially since even in today's Western scientific, beautiful world, we still don't have a whole lot of evidence of what exactly is going on and how this whole consciousness and shared consciousness thing experience occurs. So we have to handle, especially this material, we have to be very, very, very careful in carrying this in a gentle way, in a very loose way, and also open to different interpretations and different language and stuff like that. But it is also fair to recognize that if you step away from it enough and you look at it as a from a world view type of thing, you do see very specific motifs, very specific phenomena unfolding. So that's where we kind of want to pay attention to, is that kind of mindset of, let's have a worldview, try not to get too sticky and cranky and prickly about this term or that term, or no, you don't go there for that, or this is not how you use that. We want to be kind of careful with that. We do want to listen to those interpretations, but we also want to remember that it is okay to both have a very strong traditional connection to wherever you come from and what you do, but then also be able to step away and hold two perspectives of what the world is doing as well. Because this is a birthright to every human being on the planet. So these are kind of common motifs. So if you go up the world tree, you'll go into the realm of like getting spirit help or getting ancestral help. Lots of times people do talk about their ancestors in the sky, their ancestors, or a lot of traditions will talk about that's where your ancestors are, that's where your spirit guides are, that's where your that's where angels are, that's where benevolent creatures or deities or support, benevolent support is at and comes from. So the journey up the tree can be pretty different, and those are usually the motifs that we find when we go up the world tree. So those are some common motifs for shamanic journey. Next up, we'll go into talking about what actually is soul retrieval. So right now, as we're going, I know I'm giving you a whole lot of information. If there is any questions coming up, please feel free to let me know as we go. Next up is our soul retrieval. Soul retrieval is kind of like a type of shamanic journey. It's a type of trance state experience. So soul retrieval is a pretty specific type. Soul retrieval sounds very dramatic. I completely give you that. Soul retrieval is essentially, it's a little bit of a different flavor of a shamanic journey. It's usually the typical situation is you have a medicine carrier of some kind, and they are playing the drum, they are moving into a trance state with you. So both of you are moving into a trance state. Both of you are moving into an altered state. And when it comes to a soul retrieval, usually it's the medicine practitioner that's doing this, quote unquote, the soul retrieving. They're going into the altered state of consciousness. They are going into the subtle realm. They're doing the work in order to retrieve some bit of medicine for the client, if you will. So you have the practitioner, you have the client, they're playing a drum or rattle, or sometimes if they can't do all that stuff and move into trance, sometimes they will play, music of a drum going or a rattle going or something along those lines. So we can maintain those beats per minute and move into that altered space. And the medicine carrier, the practitioner, they'll move into that altered state. They'll do whatever they do. Now, they don't have to adhere to what I've suggested about how to proceed in a certain way. And when I do, what I can tell you is my experience and what I've heard from other people. From myself, what happens is I'll go to the world tree. I'll talk to the world tree for a second. I'll be like, hey, do you have some input for me? Can you give me some guidance about how to proceed for this person who I'm doing this medicine work for? And oftentimes I do get guidance from the center tree. Oftentimes it'll either confirm what my suspicions are personally, or it'll definitely give me some guidance and suggestion about how to proceed. So Oftentimes, depending on what the world tree has to say or what input goes on or what I'm experiencing, I will then travel in that direction. For most of the soul retrieval work, it's down into the world because down into the underworld, because most of the time it's from great wounds. People are wounded, and that's why they're wanting to do the soul retrieval stuff. So we do the soul retrieval work, we go into the underworld. If we're dealing with wounds, the majority of the time, at least in my experience and what I've heard from other folks, from other practitioners, most of the time it's down to the underworld to retrieve that which has been broken off from the experience, broken off from the spirit, broken off from my life. That's where things are to be retrieved. All right. And or to commune with the dead. Maybe, you know, I've worked with several war veterans, and several war veterans that I've worked with, there's a they've given oaths. They've given oaths to watch over a family member, or family members left over from a fellow service person's death, and they make an oath to watch over those people. And depending on how the client has come home and has their own issues and has their own problems, they can or cannot fulfill that oath, and that can be soul crushing for that service person, for that veteran. And so that veteran has, you know, I've worked with several veterans where we do go into that underworld, and I do my work and they do their work as we go into this underworld and talk to the dead and be like, hey, listen, this is what's going down. I got to talk to you about this because I feel like I can't bear this burden. This is just, I've got so much going on in my life, and I need to connect with you and talk with the dead about this experience. Once again, this is wicked old practices. I have not been able to find one even semi-sophisticated ancient people's tradition that does not have something like this in their toolbox of not only collective medicine for the tribe, but also for individuals. So it seems to be universal to go and visit the dead and talk with the dead and process with the dead and negotiate with the dead. So as we do our soul retrieval stuff, we go down into the underworld. The practitioner is doing their work. Possibly the client is also doing their own work. The time period goes by with the playing of the drums, and then we all come back to the surface. We all get called back up through the world tree, back to our normal waking consciousness. And then we do a sharing. We talk about what we find. And I can tell you from personal experience, when I do this for folks, most of the shit I make contact with in the underworld, most of the activities that go on there, I don't completely understand. Most of the time, and this is where this gets very exciting in the conversation of how real is this stuff. Most of the time, as I do this soul retrieval work and go and do this stuff, like I said, I don't understand a lot of things I might be making contact with in the underworld, but when I bring it back and share it with the person, with my client, it lands for them. That's pretty exciting to me. That means something to me. Now, however that whole thing occurs, I'm just like you. I have no freaking clue. And I'm not about to project a set of incoherent ideas upon it, or I'm not going to project my beliefs upon it. I can just tell you that it seems to work. It seems to land for them. And how that lands, I mean, how and how well, or how much it lands, or what lands for them, I usually don't know. There's some stuff for them I'll retrieve or I'll bring back, and things I'll say and interactions I'll have, and they'll be like, I don't get that. And then 6 months later, 2 years later, 5 years later, they're like, holy shit, dude, you ought to hear this, because remember that thing you said that we didn't quite understand? This is what landed. This is what it was about. This is what I found out later on. So that's weird. That's interesting. That's curious. And that keeps me in the game participating as far as energy medicine and being a medicine carrier is concerned, because I get to see firsthand really cool stuff like that happening. And this reminds me that even though a lot of this stuff is not quantifiable in a traditional scientific fashion, it doesn't mean that it's not real or valuable. Okay. So once again, we have to carry this stuff we got to be real gentle carrying this information, and not being rigid with it, not being prickly with it, not being an insistent fundamentalist about it. We have to kind of just honor it as kind of this very curious and semi-mysterious work that occurs. And it's part of our shared hallucination of reality as humans. And if that creates health and healing for folks, I think that's still a worthy investigation and worthy practice to include as far as a medicine toolkit is concerned. So this is usually how that goes. This is when we do soul retrieval, okay? And like I said, it's usually for some type of injury, some type of trauma, some type of recuperation. Now, when we look at what happens to the brain state, so when science and researchers have investigated what happens to the client and the practitioner when we hook them up to brain scanners and different things along those lines, brain monitors, and looking at their brain waves, what occurs is that both participants move into some kind of altered state experience. So we have evidence of an altered state actually being experienced by the people. During that altered state of experience, what we talked about in the ASC lecture I did last week, what we know about altered states of consciousness and their relationship to trauma is also that during altered states of consciousness, depending on how powerful the altered state of consciousness is or in what mental psychological state the client is in, when they move into that altered state, increases the probability. Altered states increase the probability for the nervous system to start to integrate material that's been overwhelming from a trauma or from an injury. And it appears that an altered state of consciousness is necessary for at least a portion of full recovery to occur, actual trauma integration to occur as far as our brain state stuff is concerned. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, look at somatic experiencing and the work of Peter L. Levine, either Waking the Tiger. One of the books is Waking the Tiger. Another one of his books that I like a little bit more because it talks a little bit more research is In an Unspoken Voice. Both of those books are good. I like In an Unspoken Voice a little bit more, and it talks very much about how altered states of consciousness are an integral part of the recovery and the trauma recovery experience for human beings. So it makes sense. It makes a whole lot of sense that if we do shamanic journeying together or soul retrieval together, I go into an altered state, you go into an altered state, we're both in this trance altered state experience with the intention to create some type of healing and to be open to healing. It makes a whole lot of sense that that window of altered state is open, so the trauma gets to get processed, especially if we have the intention of processing trauma or a past wrong or something like that. So then the mind, the I experience of reality of that client on the table, then puts together a storyline about how to heal, about how that integration is going to happen. So it is the belief of us in ITB and other groups that from the I quadrant to the it quadrant, to the we quadrant, to the its quadrant, a quadratic perspective of this is you have brainwave changes, right? In the it quadrant. We then have the I individual who's going to process those brain waves based off of their intention and their experience of reality. We then have the we territory, which is a relational space, but it's also a shared relational space of this is what we think, this is what we believe, this is what we feel. Then you have stronger cultural momentums that are major infrastructures of mind, theory, belief systems, cultural stages of development. And as we kind of combine this all together in the individual back up into that I quadrant, what we get is an interpretation of those other three quadrants getting processed in the I space, in the interpersonal space. So we got an altered space, we have an altered state of consciousness, measurable and quantifiable. All this data from the other quadrants occurring, and for the individual, their projection or their experience in the mind is some type of reconciliation, some type of integration of that traumatic material in story form. So this is very, 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 very powerful work. And this is why it's powerful work, because the individual has the opportunity to create a storyline spontaneously, of course, influenced by all four quadrants, and made possible by a brain state change in the it quadrant, a brain state shift that's palpable, quantifiable, a brain state shift that allows for this storyline, this experience, this projection to create some integration. So this is how we see it in the integral perspective, is that it's not just, you know, you got to be super spiritual and believe in a certain way. You got to be down with the mysticism. You got to be into this type of spirituality or religious experience or shamanic work. You have to. We kind of want to clear a lot of that bullshit away. You can use those things, but from where we're sitting in our practices, this is just a common sense type of a situation. This is just a natural phenomena. And when you look at it from the different quadrants, it seems to be very, very real and relevant. It seems to be kind of a fact of the human experience. Now, I have friends, I have folks that don't talk about shamanic journeying, but they do stuff like adventure therapy. They do stuff like play therapy. And when we sit down and talk about what adventure therapy is, what play therapy is, and it's extending out into other areas, when we sit down and talk like that, the themes, curiously enough, the motifs, curiously enough, are very similar to the ancient people's traditions of shamanic journeying and changing. And granted, there's not as much altered state stuff going on, but it's a storytelling about, it's a storytelling and a reenactment of what traumatized me. It's shared between two people, sometimes more, and it creates an opportunity for us to re-immerse ourselves and re-experience the echo of what we've been through. And it's a storytelling. It's projecting onto reality what I think the story is. And it appears that for the human experience, it's very important for us to project and recreate and tell the story of these traumas, of these losses, of what we're trying to integrate and what we're trying to do in order to save ourselves and save our people. So for us in ITB, this is our primary orientation to shamanic journeying and in specific soul retrieval. This can get very exciting. I love this topic. I've done tons of shamanic journeying work personally for my own health and healing. I've done a fair bit of soul retrieval for other people. There's a number of ways we can kind of do this stuff. And this is what I find is exciting about learning the old school versions of shamanic journeying and what's it called? And soul retrieval, is that even if you're sitting in front of a person that doesn't hold those belief systems, you can kind of tweak the language a little bit to fit their belief system. So there have been situations, not many, where a person that has a relatively traditional view coming from a Baptist background or a Methodist or a Christian or a Catholic background has come, and we've done this shamanic journeying work. And instead of calling it shamanic journeying, we call it just kind of prayer work or prayer healing work. We talk about it as far as like imagining their higher power or their angels or their perceptions of their spiritual realm coming to aid them and support them and create healing for them, and connecting with the dead, connecting with lost portions, connecting with that trauma. So what I think is important, especially for the 21st century, what's also important for the 21st century and for the myriad of different traditions that are being just coming to the surface, and we want to honor those traditions, is I think it's important for us practitioners to get to a place where we're not really cranky about using different words. We don't take it personally if they get upset by a term like shamanic journey or underworld or spirit world or home tree or world tree or axis mundi or heaven or Elysium or different terms like this. If we don't have shared terminology, it still is okay for us to do this work, because we can, as a practitioner, we just simply change the language to whatever tradition they're a part of. Because like I said, this is a universal practice. It's a universal human practice. Of course, we have to be careful about appropriation and different things along those lines when we talk about ourselves. We manage that relationship to appropriation by making sure that those who are medicine carriers and practitioners do point to a tradition that they come from. And so we do want to honor those traditions, and we do want to care for those traditions. And if we feel very strongly about staying connected with those traditions, choose that corner and sit in that corner. I think that's great. And it also can be beneficial to recognize that the tradition that you are very excited about is not the only tradition that's ever done this stuff. And so we want to try and hold both of those as true as we proceed into it. If you are a practitioner who wants to experience this stuff and explore this territory, if you're a person that's not interested in becoming a medicine carrier of this stuff and facilitating this for other people, if you're just interested in your own healing, very much so you have permission to explore into this and allow different traditions to kind of inform you, you know. Give yourself permission to be impacted by these different traditions, yet honor them and support them and point to them as best as possible as you do this work and as you get benefits from the work. So we want to create this kind of honor of specific traditions, as well as understanding that there is a greater world phenomenon happening in relationship to these altered states of consciousness. So I think we can hold, I think we're sophisticated enough, and I want to invite you to be sophisticated enough to hold those two contradictions, to hold those two experiences. Maybe not equally, but hold them with the same regard, with the same respect, with the same honor that they deserve, you know, because inevitably, we're all one species. As far as the humans are concerned, we're one damn human species, right? Definitely we come from different cultures, but our general biological, physiological bequest that's been given us, this body from our ancestry, we're subject to. We are experiencing the same things that the ancient peoples of this planet experience on a regular basis when we take mushrooms, when we listen to a beat at a certain moment, at a certain pace. When we go into these realms, it's astonishing how similar they are to our greatest of ancestors from oral history. So it's a given right to you. It's a given opportunity for you to explore. We just ask that you explore it with honor and with the gravity and the respect that it's worth. And if there is a tradition that you got a lot of this education from, then honor that tradition just as much, or honor other traditions just as much as you honor your own. So we just want to be very, very mindful of that, with that. So I'm going to open the floor to a couple of questions if anybody has any questions. If not, I'll just give a little bit. I'll have a backside conversation here. I got a little bit of closure statements to make, but I'm going to open the floor for conversation if there is any. So in closure, one of the big things that comes up is how real is this stuff? Is it all just kind of like an amalgamation? Is it all just this metaphor? Is it all just imagination? Is it all, you know, is it a hallucination? And usually when we talk about the realness of it, or is this just imagination, or is this just, you know, a hallucination, usually it's perceived as a derogatory thing, as if imagination and hallucination and shared hallucination is actually a rare thing and a bad thing. And quite honestly, it's not. If you enter into any religious tradition or faith tradition, you are willfully succumbing to, you are choosing to hold a belief system with other people, and that's a hallucination, man. I mean, that's a projection of our experience and our feelings onto reality. And that's perfectly natural as long as you're not fucking killing people and torturing people. But we all have the right to project onto reality what we think. And if we find somebody else that feels the same way as us, excellent, right? So any religion, even, and a great example is, I think a wonderful example is reincarnation. Now, there's shaky data at best about reincarnation, right? Reincarnation is very well accepted by so many different traditions and different perspectives. It's very, very, very popular stuff. What I find, and what I want to point out, is that this is a projection on reality. This is a projection of a belief onto a group of people, or onto a life, onto reality by a group of people. Why they do it, the answers can be myriad, but they still do it. We humans still do this because our awareness is limited by what this physical, gross creature can interpret about reality. We're all going to be projecting onto reality. None of us, no one sees the fullness of reality. And so we have to kind of recognize that if you're going to say something like, should we discount these trance experiences because they're not real within a certain quadrant, you got to be really, really, really careful with that. Because as we've started to add up the data more and more and taken a little bit more of a world view, What we've noticed is something as far as the human experience is concerned. From the I perspective and from the I quadrant and the we quadrant, it is very real. It is a shared phenomenon. And strangely enough, cultures that have never met before from around the world, before we had such world global travel, they actually had very, very similar perceptions of reality and about experiences. Places that are completely untouched by our current culture still have those type of experiences that come up. And granted, there can be some conversation about, well, that's just because the shared story is concerned. But once again, that's kind of shaky. That one group spawned all this same storyline. It's kind of a shaky type of a deal. But nevertheless, so what we want to talk about as far as realness is concerned is we really don't, at this stage in our scientific exploration, we don't really know how to qualify and quantify what consciousness is. In the AI community, there's a lot of debate about what that means, when something is conscious, what consciousness actually is. There is some evidence that we can pay attention to the collective ebb and flow of consciousness. Once again, this is the hard science and provable or reproducible science on it is kind of wishy-washy at times. But there are some not so bad postulations about how this ocean of consciousness occurs, and the ocean of consciousness theory, and that the cosmos is conscious in some form or fashion, actually does solve a lot of problems that we see as far as the phenomenon of human beings living in culture. So the realness of it is debatable. I can't remember which book it was from Stanislav Grof. Stan Grof was part of the first teams of researchers of LSD here in the States. As the States shut down their research of it, he simply went over to Europe and continued to study LSD. He then put down LSD because it was starting to have certain odd effects on humans physiologically and had more issues coming up. And so he started realizing that just by breathing, you can elicit the same biochemistry, the endogenous, the naturally occurring chemistry inside the brain, which looked very much like LSD and other hallucinatory experiences. So he shifted from just researching LSD to researching the altered states that arise from breath work. The guy has done really, really, really wonderful gathering of data and research in the world of altered states of consciousness through breath. He's administered, Jesus, I don't know how many thousands of breathwork sessions and documented how many thousands of breathwork sessions. But the interesting thing that he has noticed is that he can take a person who knows about some of this lineage, has a lineage of moving into the underworld or upper world of shamanic journeying. You can take some of this information, you can take a person from there, you can take a person who's never heard of this shit, raised in a strictly, American or European Western mindset. Take that person. You can take a person who's an atheist, you can take a person who's a strict religious fundamentalist, and if you get them to breathe, and you get enough of those populations to breathe, what you start to notice, what he has noticed, is that one way or the other, there is a shared hallucination about these altered state worlds, okay? There's clearly some type of shared experience that goes on. And since most scientific perceptions of consciousness is that consciousness happens in the body and erupts from the body instead of we're swimming in an ocean of consciousness, it gets kind of strange why you see the same motifs arising in so many people from such different worldviews and spaces. And so what he has compiled, what he's talked about, once again, I apologize for not knowing the name of the book. Hopefully I'll find it and then post it in this in the chat of these things afterwards. What he suggests is that these places are real as far as the I and we quadrant are concerned. Phenomenologically, they are real for the human experience. Now, whether my dog, if I give Sasha a mushroom, a hallucinogenic mushroom, whether she goes to those same places or not, who freaking knows? And also how to get that information out of her. We don't have that set up yet. But as far as the human species is concerned, the human creature, there does seem to be at least plenty of anecdotal evidence that there's something going on. When we go into altered states, there's some territories that we go to on a regular basis that are seem to be inherent to the human experience. And once again, we can't talk to other dogs or elephants or other advanced brains on the planet to report and interview them. But when it comes to humans, we do start to see a very, very, very consistent archetypal motifs starting to emerge. Now, that's not irrefutable proof that these places are real. By far, it's not. But it is a terribly curious type of a phenomenon that is arising. And we can also say that humans can heal from doing this. And so we have interesting evidence of just beautiful group healings as well as individual healings and recoveries that occur. So one way or the other, it seems to be an extremely relevant part of creating harmony and resonance and integration for the human experience and the human mind and the nervous system and the stress response systems and the physiology. So is it real? That's really depends on which quadrant you're trying to get real, the term real from. So we want to kind of carry that with some gentleness, and we kind of want to honor the limitations of this work as well as the powers of this work. Oh, and also another common thing that comes up is this witchcraft or satanic or something along those lines. I just want to be clear. This is like any other technology of consciousness or technology of the subtle realm. Can you do evil shit with it or inherently bad things and cruel things with this material? Of course you can. It's a tool. So if you're going to do shitty stuff with it, if you're going to do cruel stuff with it, can you use it in a cruel way? Sure, 100%. But it itself is not cruel. It itself is not evil. It itself is not, what's it called? Of badness or of evil. Okay. Another thing that comes up with a lot of people is they say, is this for everybody? Hell no, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody, and the populations you want to be really careful with introducing this with, or if you are a part of this population, you want to be careful proceeding with this, and you want to find somebody that you trust that can do this work with you. Populations, if you've experienced large amounts of abuse, if you've experienced physiological, or whether it's physical abuse, whether that be, that includes sexual abuse or psychological abuse, one way or the other, if you were subject to a lot of that stuff, shamanic journeying on your own, you want to be very careful with. You want to find a practitioner. You want to work with someone that is trusted. You want to work with someone that is experienced. The reason you want to be careful with that is there's a high likelihood that in your experience of that trauma, you kind of didn't put your identity together very well. That trauma caused the structure of your identity, the structure of your personality to be warped to a certain extent, to be unhealthy or unfulfilled or completely disowned. So that means that you are at risk when you move into these altered states of consciousness and you have some boundary issues, and you'll have to renegotiate those boundaries, and those boundaries may be freaking terrifying because there's trauma around them. So if you have severe trauma in your history for whatever reason of any flavor, you really want to proceed with caution moving into altered states of consciousness on a regular basis. This also goes for people who have PTSD, whether from war or once again from some type of trauma. We want to be careful with that. Or I should say, and this also includes folks who have struggled for a very long time with some pretty serious addictions. Addiction, substance abuse, specifically alcohol, heroin, cocaine, these different substances that are very, very, very trying to the body, very, very trying to the spirit, to the psychological systems. We want to proceed with caution because these altered states can provide sometimes a shaky experience of reality. These altered states can also bring you closer and closer to the wounds you got from these drug experiences, or the wounds you got leading you to the substance abuse, meaning you were wounded and then you went to substances in order to decrease the pain. So one way or the other, these altered states of consciousness have the probability of maybe shaking you up a little bit, which as you know, if you've spent time around addicts or are an addict, that will increase your probability of quote unquote falling off the wagon, lapsing, if you will. And so we want to honor your sobriety, and we want to work in support of your sobriety. So we want to move really slowly. If we are dealing with altered states of consciousness, we want to, in the shamanic journeying stuff, we want to move really slowly and with a team of those populations. So is it for everybody as far as healing is concerned? Yeah, sure. Should everybody get out and start playing with shamanic journeying no matter what? No, not really. We want you to honor the power of altered states. We want you to honor the reality that our culture is wickedly undertrained and undereducated about what it means to actually to fully recover and to actually fully integrate trauma. It seems like we're just now starting to really understand what it means to integrate trauma and how to process trauma and how to heal from that and what that even means. So I would proceed with caution, and I would have a team for that stuff. So that's one of the reasons why ITB is here. So we are a resource for you if you're wanting to investigate that, myself as well as the other stewards. So you're welcome to that stuff. And also when you're out there looking for someone else, look for a team if you do fit into these categories of these at-risk kind of categories when it comes to shamanic journeying. That being said, even though there are risks if you come from those communities, holy crap, the gains. If you do find someone that you trust and you do find and you do put together a team for your healing process and your healing journey, boy, oh boy, the gains that you can get from some of this stuff are astonishing. They're miraculous in some situations. So it is worthy to participate in it. But once again, if you come from a rough background, these risky backgrounds, the risk is worth it, but you got to take that risk in a intelligent way with a team and with a group, and be careful along the way and make sure that team is talking to each other. So this is what we suggest if you're going into the world trying to do this stuff. If you want to investigate this stuff on your own, please reflect on what you've been through and what your experience of trauma has been. How are your boundaries? If you have problems in romantic relationships or friendships or work relationships where you have a hard time owning boundaries and working boundaries, you should probably do some working of boundaries work before you just start jumping into altered state of consciousness work. I know it sounds more dramatic and more exciting to maybe do shamanic journeying and soul retrieval and explore this territory and have a great time with altered states. But from what we've experienced in ITB and others have experienced in the healing realm, we should proceed with caution and with honor and respect, and remember that we are worth moving slowly for, and that there is some suggestion that it's worth taking care of your boundaries and your general health first before you start jumping into some wild and crazy shit. So thanks for paying attention. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the questions. Please join us next time. I don't have in front of me what the next conversation is about, so fabulous, not a very good host. Anyhow, please feel free to look at more of our information on our website, embodyingitb.org. If you want to make a donation to us, any amount is deeply great. We are deeply grateful for. Thank you. I'm happy to share my time with all of you. It's I love this stuff. I'm very excited, as you probably tell, about this material and sharing this material. So please find us on Facebook or at Integral Transformative Bodywork Sangha. You can also find me on Facebook at Jeff Koshin West. We do post on our website and in our Facebook presentations or pages that we do these Sunday school events as well as other events there, so you can keep up with us as far as that's concerned. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you for joining me. Please write and make contact with us if you have any other questions. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. All right. Be well, stay safe, feed yourself, get plenty of rest, care for yourself, care for those within reach, do something good for stranger. I love you very much. Good luck. And we're all on this together, and I'm very grateful for you. All right. All right. Take care. Till next time. Next Sunday, huh? All right. Next Sunday at noon Eastern time. See you there.